It was just past midnight when I found myself walking along the snow-blanketed trail behind my cabin. The trees were tall, skeletal, their branches scratching at the faint, flickering glow of my flashlight. Each step I took crunched against the icy ground, echoing in the absolute silence around me. My breath rose in thin, trembling clouds, and somewhere deep in the woods, something seemed to shift, watching. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, shadows cast by the pale moonlight. But then a low, almost human-like hum drifted through the fog, soft but deliberate. I froze. The snow muffled everything except that quiet vibration in the air, and I realized I wasn't alone. Something, or someone, was moving in the darkness, mimicking the shapes and sounds of the forest itself. My heart thumped in my ears, yet I felt a strange calm, as if the woods were inviting me to look closer, even though I knew I shouldn't. And then, just as I raised my flashlight, I caught a glimpse of it. Something with eyes too knowing, too human-like, and I never should have opened the door. The snow was quiet tonight, too quiet, almost. Each step I took pressed into the soft white, leaving a trace that seemed to vanish as soon as I looked away. The moon hung low, pale and fragile, brushing the treetops with light. I could see frost clinging to every branch, delicate and sharp, catching the glow in brief flashes. A breath escaped me, fog curling in the still air. I thought I heard a shuffle, soft, fleeting behind me. But when I stopped, nothing remained but the hush of snow falling from needles. The path wound deeper into the forest. Every crunch of my boots echoed, though there was no one else to hear it. I told myself it was just the snow settling, yet the echo lingered longer than it should. A whisper brushed the edge of my mind, soft, almost a hum. I tilted my head. Nothing, but the trees seemed to lean closer. Their shadows flickered in the fog that had begun to settle, curling around the trunks like smoke. I blinked. A shape moved there, at the corner of my vision, but when I turned fully, the space was empty. I kept walking, faster now, boots crunching. The whispers returned. They were distant, tangled, almost sad. Sometimes a syllable would tease me, dissolve into the cold air before I could recognize it. A pause. The snow beneath me shifted, though the wind was still. A faint pressure underfoot, like another set of steps trying to follow mine. I froze. Nothing came. My own shadow stretched long across the snow. And then it twitched. A movement that wasn't mine, yet mirrored me perfectly. I stopped. Held my breath. It stopped too. I could smell the cold, sharp, almost metallic. Each inhale felt like it drew the forest closer. The whispers were nearer now, curling in and out of the fog. Sometimes soft, sometimes urgent, like tiny voices that knew the shape of me. I tried to call out, but my voice was swallowed immediately. Only a faint rasp returned, as if the snow itself was breathing in response. The fog thickened. Shadows stretched and bent over the trail. Something moved in the corner of my eye, a flicker that vanished if I looked directly at it. I imagined hands reaching from the mist, brushing against the air, brushing against me. Footsteps. Soft, not mine. They mimicked my pace, but always a fraction behind. I stopped again. The footsteps stopped. The forest seemed to lean in closer. Branches groaned under their own weight, and somewhere, far above, the moonlight fractured through clouds, giving fleeting clarity, revealing a shape, darker than shadow, almost human, almost wrong. I moved, carefully, slow, deliberate steps. The snow resisted, pressed into the soles of my boots, leaving hollow echoes. The whispers shifted with me, curling around every branch, every tree, a ghostly choreography I couldn't escape. A sudden hush fell. Even the wind seemed to pause. Only my own breath broke the silence, and then a fleeting shadow crossed the trail. Not ahead, not behind, just beside me for the briefest heartbeat. I turned. Empty. Yet the unease stayed, lingering like frost in my bones. A curiosity rose, subtle and sharp. What followed me? Was it waiting or just watching? The snow continued to fall softly. The whispers faded into the distance, teasing, hinting, leaving questions that had no answers. And the forest stretched on, pale, endless, and still. I kept walking, step after cautious step. The shadow, always just beyond the reach of light, never quite gone. The whispers, always there, fading and returning like a thought I couldn't remember. I don't know how far I went, or how long I walked, but the forest held me quiet and cold, and I realized I was not alone. The woods were heavier tonight. Icy branches scraped each other, scratching the sky. The snow beneath my boots pressed softly, absorbing every movement. A low hum vibrated through the pines. It wasn't wind. It wasn't the trees settling. It was human, almost? I paused. The hum lingered, curling between the trunks like smoke. I tilted my head, listening. It rose and fell, soft, patient, coaxing. My breath fogged in front of me. The cold pressed against my skin, biting at my cheeks and neck. Each inhale carried the scent of pine and wet frost. The hum pulsed again, closer, yet impossible to pinpoint. I stepped forward. Branches scraped my jacket, tiny icicles pricking at my fingers. The snow muffled my calls, swallowed them whole before they could leave my lips. I whispered my own name. Only the hum answered, steady and low. The forest warped around me. Paths twisted in impossible angles. I tried to follow the hum, but each step led me deeper into a maze of white and shadow. My own footprints blurred, fading under fresh snow. A movement flickered between two trunks. Glowing eyes. I blinked. They vanished. I froze. The hum shivered, splitting into something softer, higher, almost laughing. The branches overhead groaned under frost and ice. I felt the vibrations in my chest, the steady thrum pressing into my ribs. Each step forward was uncertain. The snow resisted. My boots sank slightly with a quiet sigh. The hum followed, stretching, bending around the trees, alive. I stopped. The forest held its breath. Even the wind seemed still. The eyes appeared again, just for a moment, reflecting pale moonlight, then gone. I shivered. Not just from cold. Something about the gaze lingered, curious, observant, waiting. I whispered again, softer this time. The hum wavered, twisting into a minor chord, vibrating the branches, the trunks, the frozen ground beneath me. My own shadow danced beside me, but now it felt heavier, longer, reaching. Branches scraped overhead, closer now, brushing my hair, my shoulders. The hum carried a rhythm, slow and deliberate, coaxing me deeper. I wanted to stop, but I moved forward anyway. Compelled by something unseen, snowflakes drifted into my hair. The air smelled like frost and old pine. I could feel the hum in my fingers, in my toes, trembling along the skin, almost a pulse. I blinked. The eyes were there again, reflected in a hollow between two trunks, not moving, just watching. Then a gust of wind shook the branches. When the snow settled, the eyes were gone. I slowed my pace. The hum softened, stretching thin across the stillness, then vanished altogether. The forest exhaled. Only the scrape of ice remained. I realized I was alone, but not quite. The impression of those eyes lingered, a weight in the silence. Curiosity pressed at the edges of my mind, sharp and quiet. I took a breath. Snow drifted onto my eyelashes. The cold bit a little deeper, and I knew, though I couldn't see it, the hum had not left. It lingered. Between the trees, the path was frozen, brittle beneath each step. Fog drifted low, curling between trees and branches, hiding the ground from view. Every exhale hung in the air, trembling, pale against the dark. I looked down. My own footprints cut a straight line through the frost. But there were others, beside mine, irregular, uneven, wrong. They didn't follow the rhythm of walking. Some were deeper, some barely touched the snow. They twisted, staggered, and sometimes disappeared altogether, only to return a few steps later. The pattern made no sense. I stepped closer to inspect them. The cold bit at my fingers as I brushed the frost away. The prints were older than they could be. Fresh snow should have covered them, but they remained, stubborn, impossible. I breathed slowly, trying to steady the rhythm of my heartbeat. The fog thickened, wrapping around me, damp and sharp in the nose and throat. It muffled my calls. It swallowed my voice. I glanced toward the tree line. Movement, or the idea of it, shifted there. A shadow lingered behind a frost-coated trunk. I couldn't be sure if it was watching, or simply existing. The footprints continued ahead, leading deeper into the fog. I followed, though my mind screamed caution. Each step creaked under my boots, but the strange prints made no sound. Yet I felt them pressing just behind me, unseen, patient. A branch scraped across my shoulder. I jumped slightly, cold sweat prickling my skin. The forest seemed to lean in closer. The fog whispered around my ankles, curling like smoke from unseen fires. I paused. The prints beside mine didn't shift, but the air felt heavier there, like someone or something was crouched in the silence. I leaned closer to the frost. Tiny shards sparkled in the pale light, revealing details that made my stomach tighten. Clawed edges, uneven pressure, the faint impression of weight that didn't belong to any human. I stood and shivered. The trees around me were still, and yet the sense of being watched pressed against the back of my neck. I turned slowly, scanning the fog. Nothing moved. But the weight of eyes, invisible and constant, clung to me. The footprints, they stretched ahead, almost beckoning, almost laughing in the snow. I tried to ignore them, to step carefully, silently, pretending I hadn't seen. But the irregular rhythm of the prints echoed in my mind, a discordant pulse that made each heartbeat louder. The fog thinned slightly. I could see the frozen path curving, a narrow ribbon of white through the darkness. The footprints twisted along it, leading me deeper. I sensed the air shift, cooler now, almost liquid with expectation. A soft rustle behind me. I turned. Nothing. Only the imprint of those impossible feet beside mine, watching, waiting. I tried to keep moving. Step after careful step, crunching over frozen snow. The tree line seemed to lean inward, the fog curling like fingers over the branches. A distant hum, low, almost imperceptible, vibrated through the frost. I stopped again, held my breath. The footprints continued ahead, silent, untouchable. And the forest. The forest held its silence, thick and patient, like it was breathing slowly around me. I felt the weight of the unseen eyes pressing closer, a coldness that had nothing to do with the wind. The footprints beside mine, irregular, older than possible, were still there. Always there, I exhaled. Snow drifted onto my eyelashes, melting instantly with the warmth of my skin. I could smell frost and pine resin, damp and heavy. The fog moved like water, shifting and curling around every tree trunk, every branch. I walked again. The prints stayed beside me. The tree line waited, and the forest held its breath. Silent dread settled in my chest. Not fear, not panic. Something quieter. Something patient. Something that would watch always. The clearing was small, framed by skeletal trees. Snow clung to every branch, brittle and white. My flashlight flickered, throwing pale light across frozen ground. Shadows twisted. Not like normal shadows, stretching in the sun or moonlight. These writhed, curling, folding in on themselves. I stepped forward. The snow crunched softly, muffled under the fog that crept low across the clearing. A cold wind brushed my neck, carrying the scent of wet pine and frost. Then I saw it, a shape in the pale light. A shadow, moving. It mimicked me. My stance, my steps, my hesitation. But backward. Every movement I made, it traced in reverse. I froze. Breath came in shallow clouds. The fog curled closer. My heartbeat rattled in my ears. I tried to step aside. The shadow followed. Every movement mirrored, but backward. The flashlight flickered again. Branches scraped each other above, sending shards of frost onto my shoulders. The snow resisted my feet, soft and slow, sucking away any hope of escape. I shifted weight, then moved faster. The shadow slid across the clearing, mimicking, taunting in silence. The fog thickened, swallowing the edges of the pale light. Shapes danced in the corners of my vision. Trees, snow, more shadows, but none as deliberate, as unnerving. I stumbled. Snow bit at my ankles. The cold pressed into my skin, sharp and damp. The shadow remained, backward, waiting, watching. I tried to call out. My voice cracked, swallowed immediately by fog and cold. It didn't matter. The shadow didn't respond. It simply mirrored. I stopped. And it stopped. A breathless pause, stretching too long, frozen. The air smelled of frost and decay. I glanced around. Everything was pale, flickering with the unstable light. The forest leaned in, skeletal and patient. Even the snow seemed heavier now, pressed down, unyielding. The shadow shifted again, a slow mimicry of me, backward in impossible grace. I felt the chill of its gaze through the snow and fog, a cold pulse along my spine. I tried to move faster. Snow slowed me. My boots sank, sluggish. Each step was labored. The shadow glided effortlessly. I faltered. For a heartbeat, I considered that it wasn't just a shadow. It moved with intention. It knew me. I stopped completely. The flashlight trembled in my hand. A gust of wind rattled branches above, scattering ice. The clearing went silent, except for my uneven breath and the crunch of snow under my boots. I stared at the shadow. It paused backward, still, impossible. Then it shifted slightly, almost curious. I backed away, slowly, careful not to break the rhythm. The shadow followed, backward, and then the flashlight died. Darkness swallowed the clearing. The shadow vanished in the gloom, or perhaps it waited, patient and still, beyond the reach of light. The cold pressed in. Snow drifted silently across the clearing. And I realized the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting. The fog pressed close tonight, thick, wet, curling around the trunks of barely visible trees. Every breath I drew tasted like frost and damp pine. Soft crunches of my boots pressed into frozen earth. But the forest felt heavier, dense, watching. Then I saw them, glowing eyes suspended in the gray, staring from the fog. Not animals. Not quite. Almost human. They blinked. Slow, deliberate, intelligent, curious, calculating. The cold air made the hair on my neck rise. I tried to step closer. The fog shifted with every movement. I could hear a distant sound, low and stretched. A howl, or laughter, curling between the trees. I stopped. My pulse rattled softly, a drum beneath the fog. The eyes did not move, yet they followed. Blinked again. The snow beneath me was soft, absorbing each step. Branches scraped overhead, ice pricking my fingers. Every inhale carried the scent of wet pine and cold metal. I blinked. When I opened my eyes, the glowing pair had shifted. Closer? Or was it my imagination twisting the fog? Impossible to tell. The distant howl or laughter repeated. Not loud, just enough to curl the fog tighter around me. A pulse beneath the earth. Beneath the snow, I whispered my own name. The fog swallowed it, teasing, stretching the syllables into silence. And the eyes remained, steady, patient, watching. A rustle to my left. I turned. Nothing. Yet the impression of presence lingered, pressing into my shoulder, my chest, my spine. I exhaled slowly. The fog swirled, pale and thick, curling around tree trunks, around roots. The eyes blinked again, synchronized almost, intelligent. I tried to take another step. Snow sank beneath my boots, slow and sticky. The forest leaned inward, pressing closer, pressing silent. The distant sound, a howl, laughter, curled around the fog. I stopped, held my breath. The eyes remained. A weight in the gray, patient and cold. I blinked, and they moved. Not fast, not sudden, just enough to remind me they were alive. Watching, judging. The fog pressed against my skin. Cold fingers brushing hair, jacket, neck. I could feel their gaze even without sight. A quiet, unrelenting pressure. I took a step back. Then another. The eyes did not retreat. They shifted with me, ever patient. The distant howl or laughter rose again, distant, stretched, curling into the fog. The forest seemed to exhale, frost drifting like smoke from unseen fires. Branches scraped softly above. The snow crunched beneath my boots. I realized then I was not alone. And the fog had never been empty. The eyes lingered, patient, blinking slowly, watching. I exhaled again. The cold pricked deeper. The snow pressed down. The forest waited, silent, unyielding. And the eyes remained, glowing softly, intelligent, human, unknowable. The grove was quiet. Gnarled trees arched overhead, skeletal fingers tangled in the pale light. Snow pressed against roots and fallen branches, soft and heavy underfoot. I noticed a hollow tree ahead. Its opening was dark, jagged, swallowing the light from the moon. The air around it smelled of damp wood, earth, and something older. I stepped closer. The snow beneath my boots sank quietly, resisting. A cold draft curled from the hollow, brushing my face, smelling faintly of decay. Then I heard it. Soft, almost imperceptible. A breath or a murmur. It trembled in the dark, coming from the hollow itself. I leaned in. The shadows inside shifted, impossible shapes moving without sound. I blinked. The murmur grew faintly louder, curling around the bark. I stepped back. The snow around my boots shifted unnaturally. It drifted slowly as if something beneath it breathed. Every small movement seemed deliberate. The hollow seemed to breathe with the forest. A quiet inhalation, exhalation, barely noticeable yet undeniable. I pressed my hand against the rough bark. It felt cold, damp, alive in a way I could not name. The murmur continued. Faint syllables, meaningless, or perhaps trying to mean something. The fog between the trees thickened, curling in low loops around the grove. Branches scratched overhead, scraping ice across the hollow. I could feel a presence, patient, watching. Not visible, not seen, but its attention pressed against my skin, tickling my neck, brushing hair, a warmth in contrast to the chill of the snow. I leaned slightly forward again. The murmuring paused. The forest held its breath. Even the snow stopped shifting for a heartbeat. Then it moved, a subtle slide beneath the frost around my boots. I jumped back. The snow had shifted in a deliberate arc, outlining a path I had not traced. The hollow remained dark, still, silent. Yet the murmur returned, soft, slow, curling through the gaps in the bark. I smelled wet earth, the faint sweetness of decay, and something metallic. It pressed close, almost tasting the air I exhaled. I circled the tree slowly, careful not to disturb anything further. The shadows seemed to stretch toward me, reaching, folding, patient. The hollow beckoned, a void in the grove, holding secrets I could not name. I stepped back again. The snow shifted with the slightest sigh, drifting unevenly as if settling around an invisible weight. I could feel it pressing, unseen, patient. The murmuring grew softer, then paused. A static presence in the air, thick and palpable. I wanted to leave, but curiosity rooted me in place. The cold pressed into my fingertips. The hollow seemed alive, older than the grove itself. I could hear tiny shifts inside, a rhythm almost like breathing, almost like waiting. I exhaled slowly. The fog curling into my lungs. Branches groaned overhead, ice and frost brushing softly against each other. The snow beneath my boots hummed faintly with unseen movement. I realized then that the tree held its own awareness. Patient, quiet, curious. The hollow did not invite or threaten. It merely existed, and I was intruding. I took one last step back. The murmur drifted into silence. The snow settled around me, and I stood alone in the grove, cold, alert, and impossibly aware of what waited within the hollow tree. The trail narrowed. Pine trees pressed close, dark and heavy, their branches brushing faintly against each other. Snow drifted unevenly along the path, soft underfoot, muffling every sound. Then I heard it. My voice, faint, from the pines, but wrong. It echoed me, almost perfectly, yet off. A mocking cadence, stretched, unnatural. I whispered, trying to match it. It answered, repeating back something I had not said. I froze. The air smelled of wet pine and ice, heavy and cold against my skin. A soft rustle moved across the trail. I blinked. A shadow flickered at the edge of my vision. It mimicked every movement I made. Not perfectly, but just enough to unsettle. I lifted my foot. It lifted its foot. I turned my head slightly. It turned too. The snow beneath my boots resisted, soft and sticky, slowing each step. My own breath drifted white into the cold. The echo of my voice from the pines continued, teasing, uncertain. I whispered my name. The echo repeated, twisted, as if something listened closely, amused. The shadow at the corner of my eye, it lingered, patient. It didn't move forward. It didn't retreat. Branches scraped overhead. Icicles pricked my fingers. The air smelled faintly metallic, or perhaps just the cold. Each step forward was deliberate, slow, conscious. The shadow mirrored, the voice mirrored, the forest itself mirrored. I stopped. The echo fell silent for a heartbeat. and then it returned, teasing, distant. Not me? Not exactly. Something else pretending. The fog shifted along the trail, curling low around tree trunks, thick and damp. My shadow seemed heavier now, pressed along the snow, leaning toward the edges of the forest. I blinked. The mimicking shadow lingered, always just there, patient, waiting for me to move. I whispered again, softly. The forest carried it, twisted it, returned it to me warped, strange, like a reflection in fractured glass. I felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing from the pines. Snow shifted beneath my boots. Not just from movement, small slides, tiny pressures, deliberate. Something unseen moved alongside me, following, matching rhythm, but never entirely human. The air felt thick, dense, like walking through cold water. I tried to ignore it. Step slowly, breathe evenly. But the mimicry persisted, relentless. The shadow in the corner, the echo in the pines, the shifting snow, all conspired quietly. I stopped again, held my breath. The forest waited, silent, patient. The echo and shadow paused, and then resumed, slow, deliberate, like they were testing me. I exhaled. Snowflakes drifted onto my eyelashes, cold and soft. The pine smell pressed deeper into my lungs, damp and clinging. The shadow lingered, teasing. The echo lingered, stretching my words into strange shapes. I moved again. The shadow moved. The echo followed. Everything in the forest became deliberate. The air, the snow, the fog, the pines, all pressing, all attentive. I realized then that the forest itself was alive, or at least something within it was, patient, observant, mirroring, curious, and I was part of its game. The trail continued, narrow and winding. Snow drifted softly. The shadow, the echo, the forest, they waited. And I stepped forward, each movement deliberate, careful, haunted. The stream was thin, frozen at the edges. Pale moonlight struck the ice, flickering across ripples that weren't entirely frozen. The air smelled of cold water and frost, damp and sharp against my skin. I knelt at the edge. The water reflected my face. But not only mine. A figure hovered beneath the surface. Elongated limbs, too long, bending in impossible ways. Its gaze met mine. Still, patient, curious, I blinked. The reflection remained. The snow behind me whispered softly, shifting as if alive. Footprints that hadn't been there moments ago pressed into the frost. I leaned closer. The air smelled sharper, metallic, like ice melting on old stone. My breath fogged the surface, curling toward the figure. It did not move, but I felt it shift somehow through the cold water. I tried to look away. But my eyes returned. The limbs stretched beyond the edges of the reflection, reaching, folding, patient. The moonlight fractured over the ice, casting jagged shapes across the frozen surface. The whispers grew. Not words, just soft, curling breaths through the snow. They wrapped around my ankles, tickling, pulling, shifting the snow beneath me. I reached toward the water. The figure did the same, mirrored perfectly. But the movement felt wrong, delayed, distorted. I stepped back. The snow resisted my boots, soft, uneven, shifting strangely with each movement. The reflection trembled. Elongated limbs twisted, folding into impossible angles. I exhaled. The whispers swirled higher, drifting across the surface, brushing my face with unseen fingers. The figure blinked once, slow, deliberate. Almost human, almost aware. I knelt again. The water trembled, faint ripples curling outward. The reflection leaned closer, stretching, bending. The snow shifted softly, urging me forward or warning me away. I froze. The forest held its breath. Branches scraped faintly overhead, ice clinking softly. The figure remained, patient, waiting, unmoving but not gone. I touched the ice lightly. It shivered beneath my fingers. The reflection followed, twisting further, longer than any human form should. The whispers rose, faint but constant, curling around my boots, pressing softly into the frost. I stepped back fully. The figure in the water didn't leave. It stayed beneath the pale moonlight, limbs folded, watching, patient. The snow continued to shift softly, whispering around me. Footprints blurred into the frost, vanishing as if the forest swallowed them. The ice reflected the moon, the figure, and me, all three in uneasy alignment. I exhaled slowly, Cold pressed into my chest. The whispers faded, leaving only the slight shift of snow, the faint hum of frozen water, and the figure remained, patient, elongated, watching. I moved along the stream's edge. Every step careful, deliberate. The snow whispered still, curling softly around my boots. And the frozen reflection followed me, in the ice, in the pale light, in the quiet wonder of the night. The path stretched long, pale under moonlight. Snow pressed softly beneath my boots, muffling every step. The trees leaned inward, skeletal, patient. Then I noticed it. Another step, slower, deliberate. It echoed mine. Every movement I made was mirrored. But just behind me, always behind, I stopped. The echo stopped. A breath of wind shifted the snow, rustling branches overhead. The forest exhaled. I stepped forward again. The echo returned, measured, patient. It was not wind. It was not me. My breath came in white clouds. The cold pressed against my neck, my wrists, the backs of my hands. The snow shifted unevenly beneath each boot. Every step was heavy, deliberate. I glanced over my shoulder. Nothing. Just the pale path stretching behind me, broken only by my own prints. Yet I felt it, pressing, unseen, patient. The echo moved with me, slow, measured, each footfall landing after mine, never before, never coinciding. Branches scraped lightly overhead. Icicles pricked my gloves. The air smelled of frost and damp wood, metallic in the cold. Each inhale carried the echo deeper into my chest. I stopped again. The echo stopped. Silence pressed around me, thick, almost tactile. I could feel the presence behind me, patient, waiting. I tried to move faster. The snow resisted. Boots sank slightly, soft and sticky. The echo matched, unchanged, deliberate. I whispered my own name. It didn't answer, but it was there, just behind, echoing the rhythm of my movement, patient, watching. The moonlight shifted across the trail, flickering through the skeletal trees. Shadows stretched and folded in the snow. I felt eyes behind me, unseen, pressing, and the echo followed, steady, deliberate. I slowed, paused. The echo halted immediately. The forest waited, patient, silent, a faint rustle along the tree line. Snow slid slightly under invisible weight. The echo returned as I moved. Every step traced by something unseen, deliberate, patient. I took a deep breath. Cold air stung my lungs, sharp and damp. The snow whispered softly beneath my boots. The echo followed, always following. I glanced again over my shoulder. Still nothing visible, only the snow, the moonlight, the long path, and the echo, slow, deliberate, pressing close in silence. I moved faster. The echo matched. Not hurried, not chasing, simply keeping pace. Branches scraped, snow shifted, wind whispered through the trees. The echo remained. The forest itself seemed aware, patient, waiting. I stopped once more. Silence. Snow drifting in soft spirals around me. The echo paused. I held my breath. Step. The echo followed. Step. It followed. I realized then the truth. I was not alone, and I had never been alone on this path. The echo! The presence behind me! Patient, unseen, I moved again, slowly, deliberately. The echo moved, and the forest exhaled softly, snow drifting, shadows pressing, waiting. The clearing stretched wide, pale under the faint snowfall. Snowflakes drifted lazily, soft against the cold. The air smelled of frost and damp pine, sharp in my lungs. I noticed the snow moving differently, drifting, curling, shapes forming in the pale light. At first I thought it was the wind, but the patterns were deliberate. They twisted into shapes, fingers, hands reaching, curling, folding in impossible angles, suspended above the ground. I stepped closer. A cold touch brushed my cheek. Soft, almost playful. Then again, a whisper of frost across my skin. The air thickened, heavy and slow. Breath seemed harder to draw, colder, denser. Snow drifted in slow spirals around my boots, curling as though alive. I stepped back. The shapes followed, twisting higher, folding, pressing against the air. Branches overhead scraped faintly, ice and snow rattling together. The clearing pulsed with quiet, patient energy. I reached out tentatively. The snow twined around my fingers, brushing, pressing, unyielding. The shapes formed briefly, then collapsed, swirling again in slow arcs. Fingers, hands, impossible and precise, a whisper of sound. Snow shifting. The ground beneath me hummed faintly, cold pressing through boots and socks. The air felt dense, heavy, as though I were submerged beneath invisible water. I exhaled. The snow drifted toward me, coiling softly around ankles, brushing calves, curling upward. The hands formed again, reaching higher, patient, deliberate. I tried to step back further. The snow resisted, shifting to block my path. Every movement I made was anticipated, mirrored by the drifting frost. The air thickened again, pressing into my chest and throat. I shivered. The cold was sharper now, biting at my cheeks, ears, neck. The snow rose slightly, spinning softly, hands folding, reaching. The clearing seemed smaller, walls of pale frost pressing inward, I whispered, barely audible. The snow twisted at the edges of my vision, folding closer. The hands formed and dissolved, curling into shapes impossible for any human to make. The frost brushed my face again, soft, deliberate, patient. I tried to move quickly. Boots sank in soft snow, sluggish. The hands followed, drifting higher, curling tighter, pressing the air with weightless insistence. The clearing pulsed quietly, alive with the slow rhythm of snow and cold. I stopped. The drifted hands lingered near my ankles, then folded upward slowly, stretching toward my chest. The air seemed to pulse, thick and slow, pressing around my shoulders, my back, my neck. Breath came in shallow, sharp clouds. I took one step back. The snow shifted immediately, curling toward me. The shapes twisted, hands, fingers, shadows in white frost, patient, deliberate. I realized then I could not control the clearing. The snow moved by its own will, alive, attentive, pressing. Every drift, every spiral, every fold of frost obeyed a quiet rhythm I could not name. I exhaled slowly. The hands of snow twisted once more, higher, reaching, curling. Cold brushed my cheeks again, soft, insistent. The clearing held its weight, pressing, patient. I stood alone, helpless, surrounded by moving snow. The forest edge stretched pale beneath a fading horizon. Snow drifted lightly, soft and cold. The air smelled of damp pine and frost, sharp and still. Then I heard it, a howl, distant, slow, stretched, curling through the trees. Animals scattered. Birds erupted in brief, frantic flurries. A rabbit bolted, disappearing into the brush. Every small creature fled the sound, leaving silence in their wake. I paused. The cold pressed into my fingers and toes. The wind whispered faintly, brushing across my face. The forest seemed to lean inward, attentive. A shadow shifted along the edge of the trees. Still patient. I blinked. It mirrored the horizon, elongated and dark. The howl repeated, faint, curling again over snow and branch. The shadow paused. Then it vanished, slipping silently behind the trunks, leaving nothing but cold and stillness. I stepped forward cautiously. The snow pressed uneven beneath my boots. Every breath I drew was sharp, visible in white clouds against the pale horizon. Every movement felt amplified, echoed by the quiet of the empty forest. Branches scraped overhead, ice rattling softly. The smell of wet wood and frost thickened around me. The horizon remained pale, stretching endless, untouched. I glanced over my shoulder. Nothing. Only snow and distant trees, patient and silent. The shadow had gone. Or perhaps it waited, just out of sight. The howl drifted again, distant, slower now, echoing off the forest edge, curling between trunks, stretching across the snow. The air trembled faintly, carrying the weight of absence. I moved forward slowly. Snow shifted softly beneath each boot, muffling steps yet pressing against them. The forest seemed alive in a quiet way, watching, waiting, patient. I realized then I was utterly alone. No birds, no animals, no footprints beyond mine. Just the horizon, pale and empty, the snow thick and cold, the echo of a distant howl. The wind brushed my neck. Branches scraped lightly above, ice rattling. The shadow remained absent, but its impression lingered, slender, patient, waiting just beyond vision. I exhaled slowly. The snow drifted softly, curling around boots and ankles. The horizon faded into gray. The howl lingered faintly, curling into the silence of the empty forest. I moved forward again, deliberate, careful, breath visible, heartbeat steady. The forest pressed inward, shadows folding, snow shifting softly. And I realized the distance between me and the howl was not empty. Something lingered there, patient, silent, watching. The horizon stretched pale and endless. The forest exhaled faintly, a sigh of wind brushing through the trees. I was alone but not unobserved. And the howl remained, curling across snow and branch, a ghost of presence, distant yet certain. The cabin sat at the edge of the clearing, pale in the moonlight. Frost clung to every pane, jagged crystals forming patterns across the glass. The air smelled of ice and damp wood, heavy and still. I approached slowly. Snow drifted softly beneath my boots. The wind whispered faintly through broken boards, pressing against my ears. Then I saw it, a silhouette, still, watching me through the frosted window. Tall, thin, impossible to see clearly, yet unmistakably present. I stepped closer. The snow shifted around me, soft and uneven. A faint breath of air brushed my cheek, cold and deliberate. The cabin exhaled with the wind, or maybe it was something else. I pressed my hand against the frost. The glass was cold, rough under fingertips. The silhouette remained patient, unmoving. Inside, the cabin appeared empty, and yet a faint breathing echoed from within. Soft, slow, almost in rhythm with my own heartbeat. I blinked. The shadow did not move, but the presence pressed against me, patient. I circled the cabin. The boards groaned faintly beneath snow and wind. Icicles pricked my gloves. The air smelled faintly metallic, like ice melting over old iron. I leaned toward the window again. The breathing persisted, faint but certain. Not from the snow. Not from the wind. From within, the silhouette shifted slightly. Not visibly, just the slightest distortion, like a ripple in the frost. It followed me, patient, watching. I realized it wasn't simply a shadow. It was attentive, aware, deliberate. I stepped back. The snow drifted around my boots, soft, curling, resistant. Branches overhead scraped, ice rattling together. The air thickened, heavy, pressing against my chest and throat. I exhaled slowly. The cabin remained silent aside from that faint breathing. The silhouette stayed. The frost seemed to swirl faintly against the glass, as though it were alive. I ran a fingertip along the window's edge. Cold bit my skin, sharp and penetrating. The silhouette did not move, but I felt it patient, pressing just beyond the glass. The wind shifted. Snow brushed my cheeks, light and cold. I realized then that the cabin, the frost, the shadow, they were a single presence, patient, waiting, watching. I circled once more, careful, deliberate. The breathing echoed faintly, slow, steady. The silhouette remained at the frozen pane. Tall, thin, patient, observing. I stepped back fully. The clearing stretched pale and silent around me. The snow drifted softly. The wind whispered faintly, and the cabin exhaled its quiet, cold breath. I stayed a moment longer, still, watching, feeling the presence beyond the glass. Then I turned. The silhouette did not leave. It remained patient, frozen against the pane, and I walked away slowly, the snow whispering beneath my boots, the cold pressing against my cheeks, the unease lingering with every step. Fog lay thick over the forest floor. Low and curling, it wrapped around my ankles like slow water. The air smelled of damp pine and frozen earth, heavy and still. I stepped forward. The mist hissed faintly, curling around my boots, shifting as if alive. Each breath felt heavier, colder, pressing into my chest. A whisper rose from the fog, soft, almost a name. I froze. Nothing moved. I moved again. The mist followed, curling upward, brushing my legs, pressing softly. Another whisper. A voice calling my name. I turned. Nothing. Just the pale, curling fog. It shifted, thick and slow, almost deliberate. The forest seemed to stretch, elongate. Trees leaned inward, branches scraping faintly, rustling like fabric. The fog pressed against my knees, my shins, almost brushing my hands. Another voice. Closer, but still faint. Soft, calling. I whispered back. No answer. I stepped faster. The mist shifted with me, hissing softly, curling around boots, around legs, around ankles. The air grew heavier, thickening with every breath. Branches scratched overhead. Icicles pricked my gloves. The fog thickened. Every step seemed mirrored in the curling haze. I stopped. The voices stopped. Only the hiss of fog remained, slow, patient, observant. I exhaled. The mist rose slightly, curling higher, brushing my calves. I felt it against my skin, cold and damp. It moved with purpose, deliberate, almost aware. Another whisper, faint, echoing. My name. I turned again. Nothing. Only fog, curling in gentle spirals around roots and fallen branches. I walked slowly. The mist followed. Soft, curling, patient. I tried to lift my foot quickly. The fog resisted slightly, curling closer to the boot. The voices rose again. Multiple now, overlapping, distant yet intimate. Calling my name softly. Almost familiar, almost human. I breathed shallowly. The forest pressed in. Branches scraped overhead, ice rattling faintly. The fog thickened around my knees, soft tendrils curling upward, brushing my sleeves. I whispered, barely audible. The voices paused. The fog hesitated. A cold breeze shifted, carrying the smell of wet pine and frozen earth. I exhaled. The fog pressed closer again, curling, hissing softly, patient. Shadows moved in the corners of my vision. I blinked. They vanished, leaving only curling mist. I moved again. Every step deliberate, slow. The whispers followed, curling through the fog, patient and distant. The forest seemed endless. The mist lingered around my legs, pressing, curling, whispering. I stopped. The voices faded. The fog clung, cold, damp, alive, and I realized I was utterly alone, but not untouched. The forest held its breath. Mist curled around my boots, whispered softly, calling faintly. I shivered, careful not to move too fast, careful not to call attention, and I walked on slowly, the fog trailing, patient, whispering, watching. The trail narrowed beneath thick snow. Boots sank softly, muffled by frost. The forest leaned in, branches scraping faintly overhead. I walked, step after step. The path stretched ahead, pale, familiar. But then it curved back. The same curve I had passed minutes ago. I frowned. The trees shifted slightly, subtly, as though rearranging while I wasn't looking. Snow clung to branches, dripping lightly, cold against my gloves. The air smelled of frozen pine and damp earth, thick and pressing. I moved faster. The trail stretched again, identical. Curves repeated, loops folding back on themselves. I stopped. The forest held its breath. The sky darkened. Faster than natural, sliding into gray and pale blue, then near black. Wind whispered faintly, brushing my cheeks. Shadows folded unnaturally across the snow. I turned. The trail curved behind me the same way. The same bend. Everything looked familiar. Too familiar. I tried to run. Boots sank deeper in snow. Branches scraped overhead, faint and slow like distant claws. The loops repeated. The trees shifted again just slightly, just enough to unsettle. My breath fogged the air. The cold pressed heavy against my neck and hands. The snow beneath my boots whispered softly, uneven, patient. I realized the path had no end. Step after step, turn after turn. The snow shifted beneath me, soft, insistent. Branches scraped closer. The wind curled around me, carrying a damp, metallic scent. I stopped again. The trail ahead looked the same as it had 10 steps ago. The same curves, the same shadows, the same pale light of a sun I could not see. I moved cautiously. Each step felt heavier, slower. The snow curled around boots, soft but deliberate. The trees leaned closer, whispering in ice and frost. The sky darkened further. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the narrow trail. Each turn revealed the same bend I had passed before. Loops folding on loops. The forest itself seemed alive, patient, watching. I exhaled slowly. The snow drifted lightly around ankles and knees. The air thickened, pressing against my chest, slowing breath. I realized frustration was heavy. The path was endless. I tried to lift my foot quickly. The snow resisted slightly. The forest leaned inward. Branches scraped, icicles pricked gloves, wind whispered faintly. I walked on, looped again, curved again, the path repeating silently. The pale light faded. Shadows pressed. The forest waited. I paused, closed my eyes briefly. The air pressed cold and heavy. The loops remained, unbroken, unending. The path stretched forward. Always forward, I took a slow step. The forest exhaled softly, branches scraping lightly. The snow whispered underfoot. The trail curved. And I walked again, patient, alone, uncertain. The path never ended. The pond lay frozen beneath pale moonlight. Snow drifted softly across its surface, brushing the ice like fine powder. The air smelled of wet pine and frost, sharp and biting. I stepped closer. The snow whispered under my boots. The ice reflected pale light, broken by shadows of trees stretching from the distant woods. Then I saw them. Eyes. A pair of deer eyes, frozen in reflection, catching the beam of my flashlight. Too long, unblinking, intelligent. I froze. The cold pressed into my fingertips, my cheeks, the sharp air biting into lungs. The eyes followed, patient, almost human in their intent. I blinked. The eyes remained. A branch creaked somewhere deeper in the forest, a soft scratch of claws against bark. The sound carried faintly, unevenly, echoing across the snow. I held my breath. The deer, or something watching through deer eyes, remained still, patient, waiting. The beam of light traced across its gaze, but the eyes never wavered. Too aware, I stepped forward cautiously. Snow pressed unevenly beneath my boots, soft but resisting. The ice beneath the pond reflected the sky, pale and endless. The trees shifted slightly in the corner of my vision. Something moved among them. The scratching came again. Claws against bark. Slow, deliberate, nearby, distant, always just beyond clear sight. I turned my flashlight slightly. The deer eyes followed, patient, knowing. The cold pressed deeper into my chest. The air tasted faintly metallic. I moved another step. The snow whispered beneath boots, curling softly. Branches scraped overhead, ice rattling faintly. The eyes, still unblinking, intelligent, watched. The forest seemed to lean closer, patient, silent. I tried to look away. Impossible. The eyes held me. The pond reflected more than ice and snow. Shadowy limbs of branches, stretching, curling, and the eyes, still, watching. The scratching echoed again, closer, then farther. The forest exhaled softly in wind and frost. My own breath hung visible, trembling in the pale moonlight. I exhaled slowly. The eyes did not move. The claws did not stop. The forest waited, patient, observant. I stepped backward, careful, deliberate. The snow shifted around boots and ankles, curling softly. The ice glimmered faintly, reflecting the horizon pale. The deer, or the eyes, remained unwavering. A branch scraped, clawed bark creaking faintly. The air thickened slightly, cold and still, pressing against my chest. I breathed shallowly, careful, aware. Every instinct screamed, yet my feet moved slowly, deliberately. I exhaled again. The eyes lingered, patient, unblinking. The pond remained frozen and silent. The distant trees whispered faintly. The claws echoed faintly in the still air. I took another slow step away. The snow whispered beneath boots. The air pressed cold and sharp. The eyes followed, patient, intelligent. And the forest waited. The forest twisted around me. Branches arched high, black against a pale sky. Snow drifted softly, curling in patterns that made no sense. I stepped forward. Boots pressed into snow, soft but heavy. The air smelled damp and sharp, carrying the faint scent of pine and frost. Branches seemed to lean toward me, slow, deliberate, not swaying in wind, bending, reaching. I froze, a brush along my shoulder. Soft, cold, fleeting. I spun, but nothing was there. Only the twisting path and snow curling in impossible arcs. The forest exhaled quietly. Snow whispered against branches. A low hum lingered faintly in the air. I could feel it brushing my skin, crawling along my neck. Branches arched closer. They pressed shadows against the snow. The path narrowed unnaturally beneath their reach. Each step forward felt heavier, slower. I lifted my flashlight. Its pale beam wavered over snow-laden limbs. Shapes shifted in the corner of my vision. Branches stretched, curling, patient. Another brush along my sleeve. Cold, soft, deliberate. I whipped my head. The shadows held still. The forest waited. Snow drifted in strange patterns. Not falling, curling, floating sideways, shaping around branches like invisible hands. The air thickened. Each breath pressed against my chest. I stepped cautiously. The path twisted beneath my feet. Branches reached further. Shadowed limbs pressed from either side. The snow whispered against boots, soft, insistent, a faint rustle overhead. Icicles rattled softly, dripping onto frozen ground. Another brush, warmer this time, against my shoulder. I swallowed hard. The forest leaned in, patient. Branches twisted closer, curving slowly, almost aware. Snow drifted in arcs that defied gravity. My heart pulsed in rhythm with the whispering air. I exhaled slowly. The brushing stopped. The forest waited. Patient, silent, watching. I walked again, careful, deliberate. Each step echoed softly in the hush of snow. Branches bent toward me as if to touch, to grasp. The air pressed damp and cold against my cheeks. I paused. The twisting path ahead looked endless. Shadows pooled at the base of each branch. Snow swirled unnaturally around roots and trunks. Another brush along my arm. Soft, certain. I spun. Still nothing. Only reaching branches and snow that seemed alive. I exhaled again. Careful. Slow. The forest leaned closer with every heartbeat. Branches arched. Snow drifted. Air thickened. Every step forward was measured, deliberate, heavy. The path twisted beneath me. Branches pressed closer. Patient, stretching. Snow whispered under boots, curling softly, insistent. The forest waited. And I walked on. The ridge stretched pale beneath the moonlight. Snow-dusted rocks and twisted shrubs. The valley below vanished into fog, a soft gray wash. The wind came first, a faint whistling curling around the ridge. At first melody only, then words, soft, unintelligible, bending around my ears. I froze. Boots pressed into the icy ground. The wind carried cold into my lungs, biting, sharp. The air smelled faintly of wet pine and frozen earth. Shadows stretched across the snow, long, thin, curling along rocks and trunks. They moved unnaturally, leaning outward, as if listening. I felt it then. Eyes, watching me from just beyond the ridge. Patient, distant, cold, still, observing. The whistling twisted again. Words almost clear, curling in the wind, brushing my ears. I turned. Nothing. Only fog, snow, and shadows stretching farther than they should. The ridge dipped slightly under boots. Snow whispered beneath each step. A branch scraped against frozen rock. Faint, deliberate. I held my breath. The wind swirled, carrying the whistling closer. The melody shifted, almost teasing, almost human. I could feel the eyes on me, following every movement. A pulse of cold pressed against my neck. Shadows bent further, long and thin across the valley below. They leaned, almost reaching, stretching with the wind. The snow swirled unnaturally around rocks, curling in small, impossible spirals. I exhaled slowly. The whistling tugged at the edges of understanding, almost words, almost my name. The air thickened. Each breath was visible, trembling in pale light. A shift behind me, soft. Almost a rustle, a whisper of movement. I turned quickly. Nothing. The ridge held only snow, rocks, and shadows leaning outward. The wind rose slightly. The whistling became louder, more insistent. It carried across the valley, echoing faintly, almost conversational. I felt my skin prickle. The eyes remained. Hidden, patient, watching. Every shadow seemed a gaze. I stepped forward cautiously. Boots sank softly into snow. The ridge curved subtly beneath my feet. The valley stretched endlessly below, fog curling like fingers. The wind curled around me. The whistling tugged at my hair, my clothes, my ears. Shadows bent farther, almost reaching. The air pressed damp and cold against my chest. I paused. The ridge exhaled softly. Snow drifted gently, almost alive, curling against rocks. The valley stayed silent, endless, watching. The wind whispered, patient, words almost clear. I moved again. Slow, deliberate steps. Shadows stretched alongside, snow whispered underfoot. Eyes followed from beyond sight. The whistling carried on, endless, patient, unnerving. I exhaled slowly. The ridge lay pale and quiet save for wind and whispers. The eyes remained, shadows elongated, and I walked on, alone, hearing words that almost made sense. The snowfield stretched pale beneath the faint moonlight. Fresh snow crunched softly under my boots. Fog rolled in slowly, curling around rocks and low shrubs, thick and cold. Footprints appeared. Not mine. Deep impressions in fresh snow, leading nowhere, fading before the eye could follow. I stepped forward. Soft snow pressed underfoot. The air smelled of ice and damp pine. Whispers rose with the wind, soft, distant, curling through the fog. I bent to examine the prints. They were irregular, uneven, like something moving differently than human. The snow glistened pale and cold. I felt eyes just beyond the fog, watching. I lifted my head. Nothing. Only fog and distant shadows twisting softly. The whispers rose again. Faint syllables, almost words brushing my ears. The footprints continued. They curved gently, leading into the fog. I followed cautiously. Each step echoed softly, but the prints never revealed an owner. The wind shifted. Cold pressed against my neck, fingers of air brushing down my sleeves. The whispers seemed closer, curling around my boots. Soft, impossible, patient. I stopped. The footsteps stopped too. Silence spread. Snow drifted in small arcs, curling unnaturally around rocks. A faint rustle behind me. I spun. Nothing. Only fog, swirling pale and thick. The footprints reappeared ahead. Closer. Perfectly spaced, deliberate, vanishing before I could reach them. The snowfield seemed endless. Whispers rose again, teasing, curling around my ears. The wind tugged at my hair, my jacket. I felt the cold press deeper into my chest. I walked slowly, cautiously, following the prints. The fog shifted. Shadows lengthened and bent toward me. The air hummed faintly, vibrating in the silence between steps. I paused again. Footsteps paused with me. The forest beyond the snowfield remained silent, only the fog, curling and pale around me. I exhaled slowly. Snow drifted around my boots, soft, insistent. Whispers rose, curling with the wind, curling toward me. I stepped forward. The footprints vanished entirely. No sign, no owner, no trace beyond the soft snow at my feet. The fog thickened. I felt eyes again, distant, patient, watching, waiting. I breathed slowly. The snowfield stretched endless. The whispers rose and fell with the wind. Footsteps, gone. And I walked on, uneasy, alone, feeling the fog close in with each soft, deliberate breath. The forest narrowed, tall pines pressing close on either side, snow-coated branches bending faintly under weight. The sky above was pale, barely visible through the frozen canopy. A howl broke the silence, close, closer than anything I had heard before. It rolled through the pines, curling between trunks, vibrating the air. I turned. Nothing. Only the narrow path stretching ahead, pale and endless. The cold bit at my cheeks, sharp, almost alive. Snow shifted beneath my boots, soft, unnatural. The wind tugged at my hair and jacket, whispering faint, incoherent sounds. The howl came again. Closer now, echoing from every direction. I could feel the vibrations in my chest. The air smelled of wet pine, frost, and something faintly metallic. Branches scraped together above. Shadows leaned down toward the path, bending unnaturally. I felt eyes, watching, patient. I stepped forward slowly. Each crunch of snow beneath my boots sounded loud in the narrow forest. Then another sound joined it. Soft, deliberate. Another set of footsteps, not mine, keeping pace. I stopped. The echo stopped. The forest held its breath. Then the howl returned, closer than before. Snow swirled along the path, fingers of it curling in small spirals, almost alive. I felt a brush against my sleeve, cold and fleeting. A shadow shifted in the corner of my vision. I looked again. Nothing. Only snow drifting in unnatural patterns, pale light reflecting off ice. The wind carried whispers curling around me. The howl came again, close, deep, hollow. It seemed to move with me, around me, pressing into the narrow space of trees. I kept walking. Boots sank softly into snow. Branches bent slightly toward me, scraping my arms. Shadows stretched long across the pale snow. The footsteps returned, soft, deliberate, echoing mine. I turned. Nothing. The snowfield ahead shimmered faintly, shifting under invisible weight. The wind rose. Whispers threaded through it, curling in and out, brushing my ears. The howl answered close behind, twisting through the pines. I could feel it in my chest, in my lungs, in my bones. I exhaled slowly. The snow drifted in small arcs around my feet. Branches scraped and swayed, bending, reaching. Shadows pressed outward, leaning closer. Another howl, closer. It rolled along the trunks, around the narrow path. The forest seemed to stretch impossibly. The path narrowed further, snow shifting, alive beneath me. I moved again, slowly, deliberately. Each step matched by a phantom echo. The air hummed faintly with cold static, wrapping tight around my chest. The forest stayed narrow. The howl stayed close. Snow whispered and curled around boots and ankles. Branches bent and shadows stretched. I paused. The echo paused. The wind seemed to settle briefly, almost holding its breath. Then the howl began again, patient, close, inescapable. I exhaled, trembling slightly. The snowfield narrowed ahead, twisting. The wind whispered. The branches scraped. Shadows leaned. The footsteps behind me vanished. But the howl remained, close, constant. And I walked on, alone, cold, heart-hammering, listening to the hollow light trembled in my hand, flickering weakly. Shadows stretched long across the snow and dirt. They moved, oddly, sometimes human, sometimes animal, sometimes neither. The air smelled faintly of wet pine and cold stone. Each breath felt heavy. Static hummed in the corners of my ears. I stepped forward. A shadow flickered near a tree. It bent like a person, then slithered like a wolf. My pulse throbbed in my temples. The flashlight stuttered. Darkness pooled in the spaces it couldn't touch. The path narrowed, twisting between dense trunks. Branches scraped faintly like claws brushing my arms. A shadow moved across the path ahead. It lingered. It reached. Long fingers, or something like fingers, stretched toward me. Slowly, deliberately. The snow underfoot whispered. Soft crunches, but uneven, mismatched. I froze. The shadow halted too. An instant of stillness, heavy and suffocating. I could hear my own breath. Fog curled around my legs. The wind carried a faint rustle, like soft whispers brushing the treetops. The shadow shifted again. Now animal, now human. Always reaching, always moving closer in the faltering pale light. I moved forward. Each step echoed softly, but something followed. Something that didn't match my rhythm. Something patient. The flashlight flickered wildly. Shadows danced along trunks and snow. One stretched across the path toward me, thin and impossibly long. Its tip hovered near my chest. I exhaled slowly, trembling. Cold scraped my cheeks. Branches bent low. The air thickened around me. The shadow vanished, then returned. Closer, flickering, unstable, human, animal, something else entirely. I felt eyes, watching, patient, almost intelligent. The wind carried soft murmurs curling around my ears. I could smell damp earth, frost, and faint iron. The flashlight faltered again. Darkness pooled and spread, swallowing the edges of the path. The snow shimmered faintly in the remaining light. A soft touch brushed my sleeve. Cold, fleeting, impossible. I turned. Nothing. The shadow returned. It hovered nearer, elongated, stretching across the path. I could see the ground beneath it move unnaturally, like it didn't quite belong. I took a careful step back. It mirrored me. Every breath, every movement. It wasn't a shadow. Not entirely. The flashlight trembled in my grip. Flicker. Pause. Flicker. The shadow reached one last time. Its tip grazed the pale light. I stumbled forward. Branches clawed at my jacket. The air vibrated softly with faint static hums. The snow whispered beneath my boots. I kept walking, careful, deliberate. Every flicker, every movement of shadow followed me. Always just at the edge of the light, and then suddenly the flashlight steadied. Shadows froze for a fraction of a second. The path lay open, silent, pale. The wind carried nothing but the faint rustle of trees. I exhaled, trembling. The shadow had not vanished. It lingered at the edge of the light, patient, waiting, flickering, reaching. I moved on, careful, quiet, every step measured, every breath shallow, and the shadows flickered behind me. The forest pressed close, thick and shadowed. Moonlight struggled through fog, pale and trembling. Branches arched overhead, skeletal, bending with the wind. I stepped carefully. Snow muffled my boots, but every crunch seemed loud, too loud. The air was damp, carrying the scent of pine and cold earth. Eyes. At first, one pair. Glowing, fixed, patient. I froze. The fog swirled around my ankles. Every breath felt heavier. Static hummed faintly in my ears. I took another step. Two more pairs blinked from the trees to my left. They reflected moonlight like pale lanterns. Shadows twisted around them, moving as if alive. A shiver ran down my spine. The snow whispered beneath me. Branches scraped faintly at my shoulders. I blinked. The first pair had shifted. A new shape appeared between them, crouched and dark. It stared. I moved slowly. Every sound amplified. My breath, my heartbeat, the faint rustle of unseen limbs. The fog seemed to coil around my legs, soft, wet, almost sentient. Another blink. The eyes multiplied. Every tree lining the narrow trail now bore their gaze. Some close, some far, all watching. The forest seemed to lean inward. Shadows grew and shrank in unnatural patterns. I could hear faint whispers curling around my ears. My pulse throbbed in the silence. I tried to focus on the path ahead. A shadow shifted in the corner of my vision. Slow, deliberate, stretching unnaturally. It vanished when I turned. Breath hung visible in the frigid air. I could feel it, cold and fleeting, brushing my cheeks. The eyes blinked again. A moment of panic. Then stillness. I stepped forward cautiously. Each blink of the eyes revealed new forms. Human-like, animal neither. Each blink made the forest feel smaller, pressing, alive. I paused. The fog drifted higher, thin, curling into shapes around my ankles. Soft rustling reached my ears. Closer. Yet nothing moved beyond the glowing eyes. Another blink. The nearest pair leaned forward. I could almost see pale outlines of limbs. Almost. They vanished the instant I blinked back. Cold settled into my chest. A heavy, suffocating weight. Branches scratched softly at my arms, yet no wind stirred. The snow beneath me whispered in irregular patterns. I exhaled slowly. The eyes, hundreds now, remained patient. The fog swirled, hiding and revealing them in turn. Shapes seemed to crawl in and out of the mist. I tried to stay calm. The forest's air tasted of frost and damp wood. Static hummed faintly. Every nerve felt raw. I moved again. Footsteps soft, deliberate. The eyes followed, unblinking, patient. Each blink brought a new configuration. Every shadow seemed alive. I reached a small clearing. The fog thinned slightly. Moonlight fell pale across the snow. For a heartbeat, I thought I was alone. But the eyes, so many eyes, blinked from every tree around the clearing. Patient, silent, watching, waiting. I stopped, chest heaving. The snow whispered faintly beneath my boots. The fog curled around my legs like slow fingers. Static hummed in the silence, and then nothing moved. Only the pale moonlight and the heavy watching eyes. They blinked once more, slowly, patiently. I kept moving. Soft steps, careful, quiet. Every breath shallow. Every blink revealing shapes that weren't there before. The forest pressed close around me. The eyes followed. Always. The clearing stretched wide and pale under the moon. Snow lay thick, crisp, undisturbed. A thin wind whispered through the bare branches at the edge. I stepped forward. Boots sank into the cold powder. Crunch. The snow answered. A faint echo. Not my echo. A soft whimper curled around the trees. I froze. Breath visible in the frozen air. Heart thudding slow, crunch, another step. A whisper rose, low, twisted, almost human. A sigh that became laughter, then a scream. I turned, thinking someone must be there. Nothing moved. Only the snow and the pale light trembling over its surface. Another step. The snow cried out again, this time louder, sharper. Like a voice I almost recognized. The wind carried it, curling it around my legs. A hum of static in my ears. A shadow shifted behind a tree. Flickering. Almost gone when I blinked. I walked slowly, uncertain. Every crunch became a chorus. Whispers, screams, laughter, all beneath the frost. It mimicked me. Mocked me. The snow shifted. Patterns formed, then dissolved. Angular, jagged, like hands reaching from beneath the ice. Cold brushed my cheeks, soft as breath. I paused. Silence fell, heavy, thick. Then a single piercing scream rang from beneath my boots. I staggered. The snow rippled as if alive. I looked around. Trees stood pale and frozen. Fog clung low, curling around the clearing. Every shadow seemed to twitch. The snow whispered again. Soft words, indistinct, rising and falling. I could hear laughter echoing from the distance. Then closer. Too close. Each step I took made it louder. The snow screamed beneath my weight. Every crunch was a chorus of voices. All shapes, all tones, all alive. I knelt, touching the powder. Cold, brittle, almost fragile. A soft rustling under my fingers. The snow shifted, twisting upward as if trying to pull me in. I pulled back. The voices rose. Screaming, crying, whispering, none of it real, yet all around me. The air thickened. Static hummed faintly in my ears. I moved. Step by slow step. The snow beneath me wriggled, alive. The voices followed. Laughing, screaming, sighing, whispering, I stumbled forward, breath shallow. The clearing stretched endlessly. The moonlight trembled over the undulating snow. Every shadow seemed to pulse. A scream, high and piercing, froze me in place. Then silence. The snow lay still. But I could feel it, breathing beneath me. I stepped again. Crunch. A whisper. A laugh. A scream. The clearing felt endless. The snow endless. The voices never still. Always underfoot. I could feel eyes on me, though nothing was visible. Shadows twisted along the edges of the fog. Cold brushed my arms. A hand, maybe, or just the wind. I kept moving, careful, slow. Every step answered in whispers and cries. The snow had a voice I could not ignore, and then a final silence. The air hung heavy, frozen. The clearing glowed pale under the trembling moonlight. I could feel it watching still, beneath the snow. I breathed shallow. Moved on, leaving the frozen chorus behind. But the echoes followed, soft, persistent, lingering. The cabin sat quiet beneath the snow. A thin haze of frost clung to the windows. The path leading here was still, muffled, untouched. I stepped onto the porch. Wood creaked under my weight. The air was sharp, biting at my cheeks. Then I saw it. A shadow lingering just beyond the glass. Still, patient. I blinked. It didn't move. Not at first, and then It began to stretch, thin, sliding sideways. I shivered, pulling my coat tighter. A static hum settled in the silence, low, almost beneath hearing. The snow around the cabin whispered softly. I looked away. When I looked back, the shadow had shifted closer to the corner. Faint, pale, watching. I stepped inside. The warmth hit my skin, but the chill of its presence followed. Every surface felt colder than it should. I moved through the cabin. The floor sighed beneath me. The windows rattled lightly in the wind. And still, I could feel it. It lingered just at the edge of my vision, in the corner of a mirror, a flicker across the floor. Everywhere I turned, it seemed to be there. I stopped. Silence stretched taut. The hum beneath my ears pulsed like a heartbeat. I pressed my hand to the wall, trying to feel something solid, anything real. The shadow drifted along the far window, slender, tall. No eyes, no face. Yet I knew it was watching. I walked toward the kitchen. The snow outside rustled faintly, moving as if alive. I paused mid-step. The shadow mirrored me, slower, deliberate. I could hear my own breath, ragged and shallow. The air thickened, pressing in on my chest. A faint scent of cold pine drifted through the broken window seal. I turned sharply. Nothing. And yet, a sense of being followed, of being circled, clung to me. Every shadow in the room seemed to twitch. The corners of the cabin grew darker, deeper. The hum beneath my ears became a soft whisper. I felt it brush past my shoulder, though no one was there. I tried to sleep. Pulled the blankets tight. The warmth barely touched my skin. Outside, the snow pressed close, whispering with every movement. I dreamed of shadows, tall and thin, sliding across the walls. They stretched, elongated, always just beyond touch. When I woke, the cabin was still, but the feeling remained. I moved cautiously. The shadow was gone from the window, but I could feel it in the corners, under the table, in the hallway. Every glance revealed a flicker, a sway, a pulse of darkness. It was patient. It waited. I stepped outside briefly into the snow. Footsteps behind me, though no one followed. The wind whispered in my ears, carrying faint laughter. I turned. Nothing. Back inside, the cabin groaned in the cold. Shadows stretched long across the floors. And always, at the edge of my vision, I could see it. A thin silhouette, waiting, patient. I moved room to room, careful, deliberate. The snow whispered through the cracks in the door. The air trembled faintly with static, with something watching. I could feel it following. Not close, not far. Everywhere, always. I sat in the corner of the living room. Eyes on the window, eyes on the door. The shadow was everywhere it needed to be. I held my breath. The hum beneath my ears rose and fell like waves. The snow outside pressed silently against the cabin walls. And then, silence, but not real silence. Something lingered. A weight in the air, a shadow at the edge of vision. I could not escape it. Not in the cabin, not in the snow, not even in the quiet. It followed always, patient, unmoving, watching. And I knew when the night ended, it would still be there. A shadow that followed home. The forest stretched endlessly. Fog curled around the trees, thick and low. Branches reached toward me, pale under the weak moonlight. The snow underfoot whispered with every step. Each footprint felt heavy, then lighter, as if the ground shifted beneath me. I thought I'd walked for minutes, or hours. Time seemed meaningless here. The path twisted unnaturally. I turned, thinking I'd gone forward, but the same tree stood before me. Its bark glistened wet. Though the air was still, a static hum settled in the fog. Soft, almost like breath. I stopped. The snow swirled around my boots. Shapes formed like fingers, then dissolved. I walked again. Every step retraced itself. The sound of my own movement echoed faintly behind me. Or perhaps ahead. I could not tell. The air thickened. It pressed against my chest, heavy and cold. The fog moved differently now, slower, deliberate. I reached out. The mist slipped through my fingers. Cool, damp, unreal. I tried to mark my path. Sticks, scratches, anything. But each mark vanished almost immediately. Snow filled the scratches, covering the traces like it had never been disturbed. A rustling sound came from the trees. Soft, like something brushing bark with claws. I froze. The sound stopped. Then, it was back, closer. Shadows shifted in the fog. Some seemed human, others long, thin, reaching. Every time I blinked, shapes changed. I felt watched. Always watched. I tried to turn. The path curved impossibly, looping. Every tree I passed had already been there. I should have recognized them, but they felt new. The snow swirled around me again. I felt it brush my cheeks, cling to my hair. The air smelled faintly of pine and ice, and something else. A metallic tang that made my stomach tighten. I whispered my own name. It echoed faintly, but wrong, slightly higher, mocking. I stopped speaking. The fog thickened, pressing closer. I could see my breath, but it felt distant, as if another watched it. Each step I took led me back. Every time I paused, I felt the forest shift behind me. Shadows lengthened and shortened unnaturally. Branches bent subtly toward me. I shivered, pulling my coat tighter. A cold gust swept through. The snow swirled into tight spirals, rising to waist height. It moved as if alive, twisting around invisible forms. I could hear faint murmurs in the wind. Whispers of movement, voices that were not my own. I stopped entirely. Listened. The forest was alive with soft, haunting sounds. Footsteps, or snow shifting. Whispers, or the fog pressing in. I could not tell. I tried to run. The path seemed to stretch further, never ending. Each step brought me back to where I had started. I was trapped in movement that led nowhere. The fog pressed against my face now, cold and damp. I tasted it on my tongue. The shadows flickered, multiplying, stretching into shapes I could not name. I felt the forest close in and my chest tightened. A soft hum rose in the silence, deep, constant, vibrating through the soles of my boots. I pressed my hands to my ears, but the hum remained. Time had no meaning. I could not remember sunrise or sunset. Only the fog, the snow, the looping path. Only the weight of being followed. The soft, impossible whispers of the forest around me. I stopped again, closed my eyes briefly. When I opened them, the path was the same. I was the same, and yet something was different. The snow swirled faster. The fog tightened like a blanket. Every step I thought I remembered felt new and wrong. I breathed deeply, tasting ice and cold pine, feeling the forest shift beneath me. I walked, and I knew it would never end. The night would never end. The cabin was quiet. Warm air curled around me, carrying the scent of smoke and pine. The fire flickered softly, painting shadows across the walls. I sank into the old chair. Its fabric smelled faintly of ash and dust. A soft creak answered each movement I made. But the chair was not the only thing moving. Corners of the room held shadows that stretched in impossible ways. I blinked. They shifted, elongated, then coiled back into darkness. I felt eyes, many eyes, watching from those corners. The air smelled faintly metallic, almost like winter snow inside the cabin. I drew in a slow breath, trying to calm my chest. The warmth of the fire contradicted the chill crawling over my skin. I tilted my head. A shadow detached itself from the wall briefly. It moved against the firelight, though no wind stirred. I thought it might be a trick of the flames. Then I noticed its gaze, fixed, patient, unblinking. My hand brushed the table beside me, cold. The wood slick with condensation, though the fire burned. A soft hum rose in my ears. Not a sound the cabin made. Something else, I exhaled slowly. The shadows remained. Some thin, almost spider-like. Others broad and human-shaped. Each seemed to lean slightly toward me. I felt their presence in the air, a weight pressing softly on my shoulders. I shifted in the chair. The fire crackled. A spark danced across the hearth, catching the edge of a shadow. It stretched, as if noticing me for the first time. I closed my eyes briefly. When I opened them, the room felt smaller. The shadows had multiplied, layered over one another. The corners held more shapes than before, and the spaces between them pulsed with quiet awareness. I tried to focus on the firelight. Its warmth seeped into my fingers, my toes, but it did not touch the cold eyes watching from the dark. I could feel their attention like a brush on my skin. A soft rustling moved behind the shelves. Books shifted slightly, though I had not moved. The air grew heavier, thickened with a presence that had no shape I could name. I thought of standing, moving toward the door, but my legs felt rooted. The chair held me, and the room, it held them. And perhaps it held me too, a whisper? I was not sure. Perhaps just the wind through the cracks. Or perhaps a sound from nowhere, a voice layered into the wood and shadows. The firelight trembled. Shadows twisted in ways impossible for ordinary objects. I realized I had not felt alone since the night began. Perhaps I never would. I leaned back, accepting the warmth and the cold together. A faint hum rose again, this time from the corners themselves. Eyes shimmered there. Quiet, patient, observing. I felt a slow pulse in the floorboards. The air smelled faintly of wet earth and smoke, a combination both grounding and unreal. I breathed in and out, soft, deliberate. The room waited. I waited. Movement at the edge of my vision. A shadow stretched toward the floor, then recoiled, almost shyly, then reformed into something less defined. I did not flinch. I could not. I could hear my own heartbeat, steady, rhythmic. But there were other heartbeats, too, or something like them, keeping pace with mine, echoing in spaces the firelight could not touch. I pressed my hands to my knees. The warmth seeped through my coat. I felt eyes there, too, in the spaces between my fingers, watching, waiting. And I realized it was pointless to try to leave. The room exhaled with me. The fire softened, the shadows contracted slightly but never vanished. They were patient, always patient. I exhaled slowly, letting the dread settle into my bones. Acceptance, quiet and unshakable, rose within me. I would sit here, and the observers would remain. And perhaps that was enough. The fire flickered once more. Shadows leaned closer in acknowledgement. And I sat quietly, feeling the calm and the fear fold together. The room waited, I waited, and the silent observers waited with me.